celebrate the development, while others are accusing the U.S.
The radar screen lit up just after dawn. At first, it looked like background noise. Another blip among dozens that appear every day in one of the most watched stretches of ocean on Earth. But this one didn't behave like the others. It didn't turn away. It didn't slow down. It came straight toward the most powerful symbol of American military power at sea. Within minutes, alarms echoed through steel corridors. Pilots were already moving before orders were spoken out loud. Somewhere above the carrier deck, a stealth fighter was being armed, fueled, and launched into the sky. What followed would never be shown in full, but it would quietly change the rules of the game. According to early reports, the object was an Iranian drone. According to later reports, it was not alone. Some claim it was testing defenses, others say it was sending a message, and a few insiders insist it was something far more dangerous. A live-fire rehearsal, meant to see how close Iran could get before the trigger was pulled. The public headline would later be simple and clean. A drone approached. A jet responded. The threat was neutralized. No damage, no casualties, end of story. But that headline hides what really happened in the air and inside command rooms on both sides of the world. Because this wasn't just about a drone. For years, unmanned aircraft have been probing, watching, learning. Each encounter is logged, analyzed, and quietly fed into future plans. This time, the approach pattern was different. The altitude was wrong. The timing didn't match routine surveillance. And most importantly, the drone did not respond to repeated warnings. That's when the decision was made. A single fighter closed the distance. No radio exchanges, no warning shots. Just seconds of silence. Then a flash in the sky that most sailors on deck would never see directly. By the time debris hit the water, the message had already been sent. But here's the part no one is talking about. Within hours of the incident, regional air defenses reportedly shifted to higher alert. Naval movements changed course, and intelligence analysts noticed something unusual. Iranian communication channels went quiet. Not defensive, not angry, quiet. The kind of silence that suggests calculation, not shock. Some military experts believe this was the closest the two sides have come to a direct clash in years. Others argue it was carefully staged on both ends, a controlled collision meant to establish new red lines without crossing into open war. And then there's the footage that never surfaced. Multiple sources claim the entire encounter was recorded from at least 3 angles: the drone's own camera, the fighter's targeting system, and naval tracking assets. None of it has been released. The official explanation is simple: operational security. The unofficial one is more unsettling, because what those recordings might reveal is not just how the drone was destroyed, but how close it came to succeeding. Tonight, we're going to break down what really happened in that patch of ocean, why this incident matters far more than it seems, and how a few silent minutes in the sky may have reshaped the balance of power in the region. This wasn't an accident, it wasn't routine, and it definitely wasn't the end of the story. The broader context behind this incident cannot be understood without looking at the long, tense, and often deliberately ambiguous relationship between Iran and the United States in the Middle East. For more than 4 decades, the two countries have existed in a state that falls short of open war, but goes far beyond normal rivalry. It is a relationship shaped by sanctions, proxy conflicts, covert operations, and constant military signaling, where almost every move is designed to be noticed, but rarely acknowledged directly. Since the collapse of the nuclear deal and the reimposition of sweeping economic sanctions, Iran has increasingly relied on asymmetric tools to project power. Among the most important of these tools are drones, fast attack boats, cyber operations, and allied militias spread across the region. These methods allow Tehran to apply pressure without triggering a conventional military response. At the same time, the United States has maintained a strong naval presence in key waterways, particularly those critical to global energy supplies. Aircraft carriers are not just weapons platforms, they are floating statements of intent, meant to deter adversaries simply by being visible. Over the past several years, encounters between Iranian forces and U.S. naval assets have become more frequent and more complex. Drones have flown close to American ships. Patrol boats have maneuvered aggressively, and radar systems on both sides have tracked each other in tense silence. Most of these interactions end without incident, but each one adds to a growing archive of data, tactics, and psychological pressure. According to defense analysts, both sides carefully study these encounters to test response times, rules of engagement, and political thresholds. What makes the recent episode stand out is the timing. It occurred during a period of heightened regional instability, with conflicts flaring in multiple neighboring countries and diplomatic channels largely frozen. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies were already warning that miscalculation was becoming more likely. Several unconfirmed reports suggest that in the weeks leading up to the incident, Iranian drone activity in international waters had increased by nearly 20%, a figure that was never officially acknowledged but circulated quietly among allied navies. There is also the domestic dimension. In Washington, pressure has been mounting to demonstrate strength after years of criticism that deterrence in the region has weakened. In Tehran, hardline factions have been pushing for more visible resistance to what they describe as American encirclement. These internal pressures often translate into actions that are risky by design, calibrated to stop just short of forcing the other side into a corner. Some former officials have described this as a controlled burn strategy, where limited confrontations are used to manage domestic expectations without igniting a larger fire. Another factor rarely discussed publicly is technology. Modern naval warfare is increasingly shaped by sensors, algorithms, and automated decision-making systems. A single drone flight can generate vast amounts of intelligence, not only about ship defenses, but also about human behavior under stress. One widely cited but unofficial assessment claimed that recent drone approaches were designed to map reaction patterns rather than gather imagery. While this claim has never been confirmed, it aligns with broader trends in military experimentation seen across the region. In this environment, the line between routine patrol and provocation becomes dangerously thin. A maneuver that one side considers defensive surveillance may be interpreted by the other as preparation for attack. The presence of advanced stealth aircraft, layered missile defenses, and electronic warfare systems only compresses decision timelines further. Officers are trained to remain calm, but they are also trained to act decisively when warning signs align. The incident involving the carrier did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the product of years of escalation without resolution, of signals sent and received imperfectly, and of two adversaries locked into a cycle where backing down is often seen as more dangerous than pressing forward. Even if no one intended for that particular encounter to cross a critical threshold, the conditions that made it possible remain firmly in place, waiting for the next moment when a single radar blip becomes something far more consequential. The moment the Iranian drone appeared was not dramatic in the way movies portray aerial encounters, but it was unsettling precisely because of how ordinary it first seemed. In the early hours of the morning, when flight operations around the carrier were minimal and visibility was stable, shipboard radar operators detected a small, slow-moving contact at the outer edge of monitored airspace. At that distance, such contacts are common. Civilian aircraft, weather anomalies, even commercial drones launched illegally from merchant vessels. What made this one different was its discipline. The object held a steady course, precise altitude, and consistent speed, behavior more consistent with a military platform than anything civilian. As tracking data accumulated, analysts aboard the carrier began comparing the flight profile to known patterns. Within minutes, the contact was tentatively classified as an unmanned aerial vehicle of Iranian origin, likely launched from land or a small support vessel operating well beyond the horizon. Iran, which has heavily invested in drone technology over the past decade, has developed a reputation for using unmanned systems not only for surveillance, but also as tools of strategic messaging. These drones are often flown just close enough to provoke a response, while remaining technically outside the most aggressive thresholds of engagement. According to standard procedure, the carrier group initiated identification protocols. Electronic signals were sent, warning the aircraft that it was approaching a protected military zone. There was no response. The drone neither altered course nor adjusted altitude. Instead, it began a shallow descent, a maneuver that some intelligence officers later described as curious but not overtly hostile. Still, in modern naval operations, silence is rarely reassuring. An unresponsive aircraft forces commanders to assume worst-case intent, especially in a region where surveillance flights have, in the past, preceded missile launches or harassment operations. What was not publicly disclosed at the time was that this drone was not entirely unexpected. In the days leading up to the encounter, U.S. intelligence had reportedly intercepted fragments of Iranian communications referencing a maritime observation mission. While the details were vague, analysts suspected a drone sortie was likely. What surprised them was the timing. The flight coincided almost exactly with a routine shift change in the carrier's combat information center, a detail some later speculated was either a coincidence or a sign of careful planning based on long-term observation. As the drone closed the distance, its onboard sensors were believed to be actively collecting data. Modern Iranian drones are equipped with electro-optical cameras, infrared systems, and basic electronic intelligence receivers capable of mapping radar emissions. Even a short flight near a carrier can yield valuable information about defensive coverage, reaction times, and patrol patterns. One unconfirmed assessment suggested that the drone briefly altered its orientation mid-flight, possibly to optimize its sensors toward the carrier's island structure, where key radar and communication systems are located. At this stage, the drone was still flying without visible weapons. That distinction mattered. An armed platform would have triggered an immediate escalation. An unarmed one occupied a gray zone, dangerous not because of what it could do in that moment, but because of what it might enable later. Allowing it to continue risked exposing sensitive data. Acting too quickly risked political fallout. The drone's approach continued for several more minutes, steady and deliberate. Some crew members later described the atmosphere as tense but controlled, a familiar tension born from years of similar encounters. Yet there was a sense that this flight was different, more purposeful. It was not skirting the perimeter or performing wide surveillance arcs. It was moving inward, slowly narrowing the gap. By the time the drone crossed a critical distance threshold, its intent no longer mattered as much as its trajectory. In naval air defense, distance equals time, and time equals options. The appearance of the drone was no longer a background event. It had become a decision point. What followed would depend not just on rules written in manuals, but on judgment shaped by history, intelligence, and the understanding that in a confrontation between Iran and the United States, even a single unmanned aircraft can carry consequences far beyond its size. By the time the drone was officially classified as a potential threat, the situation around the carrier had already shifted from observation to defense. Distance, speed, and angle were now being recalculated every few seconds, not by a single system, but by an interconnected web of sensors, analysts, and automated threat evaluation software. In theory, an aircraft carrier is protected by layers of defenses designed to handle far more dangerous scenarios than a lone unmanned aircraft. In practice, commanders know that the most dangerous moments are not large-scale attacks, but ambiguous ones, when intent is unclear and reaction time is limited. This was one of those moments. The drone's flight path brought it into a zone where any sudden maneuver could force a split-second decision. At that range, even an unarmed platform could pose a serious risk, either through collision, electronic interference, or as a targeting asset for other weapons not yet visible. Officers on the bridge and in the Combat Information Center were aware that doing nothing carried its own consequences. Allowing the drone to continue would signal hesitation, potentially inviting more aggressive approaches in the future. Acting decisively would send a message, but one that could not be taken back. The decision to respond did not come from panic. It came from protocol shaped by years of similar encounters and by lessons learned the hard way in other parts of the world. A combat air patrol aircraft, already airborne as part of routine operations, was quietly redirected. The pilot was given minimal information. an unresponsive unmanned aircraft. Closing distance, rules of engagement in effect. There were no dramatic countdowns, no heated arguments over the radio. Everything unfolded with professional calm, which, paradoxically, made the stakes feel even higher. As the fighter closed in, the drone remained silent. No evasive action, no acknowledgement, no change in behavior. According to later briefings, this lack of response was a key factor. In modern military doctrine, silence is often interpreted as intent, especially when paired with steady approach. The pilot visually confirmed the target and awaited final authorization. That authorization came quickly. The engagement itself lasted only seconds. There was no prolonged chase, no warning shot. One controlled action, a brief flash, and the drone ceased to exist as an airborne object. What happened next mattered almost as much as the intercept itself. Within minutes, the carrier group adjusted its posture. Air patrol patterns shifted, sensor modes were changed, and additional assets were quietly repositioned. None of this was announced publicly. To outside observers, the ocean looked calm, unchanged. But inside military networks, the incident triggered a cascade of analysis. Data from the intercept was immediately reviewed, not only to assess performance, but to understand what the drone had managed to collect before it was destroyed. Initial assessments suggested the drone had been active long enough to gather at least partial electronic signatures from the carrier group. While nothing catastrophic was compromised, analysts noted that even incomplete data can be valuable when combined with previous observations. This reinforced a concern long held by defense planners, that repeated low-level encounters can gradually erode the secrecy of even the most advanced systems. The political consequences unfolded more slowly, but they were no less significant. Official statements were deliberately restrained, emphasizing defense and professionalism while avoiding inflammatory language. Behind closed doors, however, diplomatic channels lit up. Allies sought reassurance, adversaries sought clarity, and intelligence agencies on all sides tried to interpret what the incident truly signaled. Was it a warning? A boundary-setting action? Or simply the inevitable result of two forces operating too close to one another for too long? In the days that followed, regional military activity subtly shifted. Some movements were routine and would have happened regardless, but others were clearly reactive. Surveillance flights increased. Naval deployments were adjusted. There were reports, never confirmed, of emergency meetings within Iran's defense establishment, focused not on retaliation, but on assessment. The absence of an immediate aggressive response was itself telling. Rather than escalating, Iran appeared to absorb the message, at least publicly. At the same time, analysts debated whether the incident marked a strengthening or weakening of deterrence. On one hand, the decisive response demonstrated that certain lines would be enforced without hesitation. On the other, the fact that the drone had approached at all suggested confidence on the Iranian side that such probes could continue with manageable risk. Some experts argued that the encounter fit a familiar pattern: pressure, response, pause, repeat. Others warned that each repetition increases the chance of miscalculation, especially as technology shortens reaction windows and removes human hesitation from some decisions. For the crew aboard the carrier, the event quickly faded back into routine. Flight operations resumed, watches changed, and the ship continued its mission. Yet those involved understood that this was not an isolated episode. It was one chapter in a longer story defined by rivalry, signaling, and restraint balanced on a knife's edge. The drone was gone, but the conditions that brought it there remained. What made this incident particularly significant was not the destruction of an unmanned aircraft, but the clarity of the response and the ambiguity that followed. No one declared victory. No one claimed escalation. Instead, both sides adjusted, recalculated, and moved forward, carrying new data and new assumptions. In that sense, the encounter achieved exactly what modern confrontations often do. It changed the equation without resolving it. Whether this moment will be remembered as a successful act of deterrence or as another step toward a more dangerous future, depends on what comes next. The ocean where it happened remains crowded with ships, aircraft, and competing interests. As long as rival powers continue to test each other in that space, the aftermath of this incident will echo quietly, shaping decisions made far from the point where a single drone met a single fighter and disappeared into the sea. The broader significance of this incident lies not in the destruction of a single unmanned aircraft, but in how it reshapes expectations, calculations, and behavior across an already fragile region. Encounters like this rarely produce immediate escalation or resolution. Instead, they quietly redefine what each side believes the other is willing to tolerate. In this case, the message was subtle but firm. Certain actions will be met with decisive responses, even if they fall into legal and operational gray zones. That lesson will be absorbed not only by the actors directly involved, but by every military and political observer watching the balance of power in the region. For the United States, the incident reinforces the role of forward-deployed naval forces as tools of deterrence rather than provocation. Aircraft carriers are increasingly criticized as vulnerable or symbolic relics, yet moments like this demonstrate their continued strategic value. They serve as mobile command centers, intelligence hubs, and rapid response platforms capable of shaping events in real time. More importantly, they function as signals. The response to the drone showed that these assets are not passive observers, but active enforcers of boundaries that may be unwritten, but are clearly understood within military circles. For Iran, the outcome likely triggers a reassessment rather than a retreat. History suggests that Iran does not abandon strategies after a single setback. It adapts them. Analysts expect future actions to become more indirect, more distributed, and harder to attribute. Rather than fewer probes, there may be more of them, conducted at greater distance, through intermediaries, or using platforms designed to blur attribution even further. In that sense, the incident may mark not a cooling of tensions, but a transition into a subtler phase of competition. Beyond the two primary actors, the event sends ripples through the wider region. Allies and partners quietly recalibrate their own security postures, drawing conclusions about reliability, escalation thresholds, and response speed. Some regional states may feel reassured, interpreting the incident as evidence that deterrence still holds. Others may feel uneasy, recognizing how easily a routine maneuver can bring major powers within seconds of open confrontation. This dual reaction underscores a central paradox of modern deterrence. Actions meant to prevent conflict can simultaneously highlight how close conflict already is. There is also a technological implication. As unmanned systems become cheaper, more autonomous, and more expendable, the frequency of such encounters is likely to increase. Each incident generates data, precedents, and expectations. Over time, these form an informal rulebook governing behavior in contested spaces. The danger is that this rulebook is unwritten, unevenly interpreted, and constantly evolving. A response that stabilizes one situation may destabilize the next if assumptions diverge. Perhaps the most consequential impact is psychological. Decision-makers on all sides now carry the memory of how quickly ambiguity turned into action. That memory influences future choices, sometimes encouraging restraint, sometimes encouraging preemption. In closed briefings, this incident will be cited not as a dramatic clash, but as a case study in how thin the margin for error has become. Ultimately, the event reinforces a sobering reality. The region is not moving toward clarity or resolution, but toward a sustained state of managed tension. Incidents will continue to occur, each one testing limits, gathering intelligence, and redefining red lines. Whether this leads to stability through mutual understanding or instability through accumulated risk will depend less on any single encounter and more on how many such moments the system can absorb before one of them goes too far.